So today we're talking about the second grade read-alouds. And one of the things that I noticed as I was looking through these books is that they definitely transition here. The literature is getting a little bit higher. There's a higher level of literature. The words are bigger. The stories have deeper themes.
And more words on a page.
And more words on a page.
It's
and some
a
of them
lot
I
more
think have
for a student to listen
That's right.
to.
And I think some of these have chapter divisions throughout.
A couple of them do.
Yeah. And so when we put these together, we did also notice that you've got some biography, you've got some animal fable tales, you've got some fairy tales, you've got stories about history, progress. So we might touch on all of those things. But one of the things I wanted to start off by asking was, in the midst of everything that a second grade student is doing, they're starting to really learn Latin through us, math, some other history studies. Why do we still do read-alouds?
That's a great question. And we answer that question a lot because we still do read-alouds all the way through high school.
Right.
We are still reading aloud to students and feel like they need they need to be read to. And when I started rereading these books, getting ready for this episode, I was also reading Mansfield Park, and I found this quote about Fanny Price's father that says he did not want abilities, but he had no curiosity and no information beyond his profession. He knew what he needed to do to get his job done, but he didn't have any curiosity. He hadn't been taught to use his imagination, and it was a limited life that he had. And we want for our students more than that. We want them to explore and to be curious and to use their imaginations. And so we're going to continue. It's still introductions to big themes that they're going to cover all the way through high school and hopefully through their lives. As we read, we're still covering those same themes. But by reading aloud to them these picture books, we are helping them to start thinking about some of these deeper issues and to think beyond just the practical.
Lewis and Tolkien and all these guys talk so much about imagination and fantasy in the story. And they say that all story is really a recreation of the great story. God is the one true creator, and every other story is just, a man's imitation of creating the story that lives in our hearts. And so it's so important, particularly in this world that focuses on pragmatism and practicality, and everything needs to have an efficient, productive, visible end, to teach students the importance of imagination and fantasy, and that there is truth above facts, which is a Chesterton phrase, that you can see there is a metaphysical world, right? We want to believe in unseen things, right? That's what it means to have faith. And so to teach students and to engage in stories and to show them that you can feel something real, that's why I think the Velveteen Rabbit is so great, because you don't have to explain that to a child. The author does that so beautifully by just using that word real. And the student knows what real means because it's such a well-done story. And so for a student to understand that there's a metaphysical world, that there is something real beyond what you can taste or see or touch, that's what we're really trying to develop in these stories. And that's why so many of these stories are so, so, so important for the child, but really for the parent as well. I mean, rereading these stories recently to prepare, I was touched how meaningful they are and how well they connect and prepare the student for what's coming in the curriculum.
Do you have particular examples? Let's go ahead and start diving into these books. Which ones really connect with you guys? Which themes are themes that you're still thinking about, that still affect you?
Well,
It is
I know I've got all these great notes. The Velveteen Rabbit. I think there are, for me.
Okay, Leigh's favorite is the Velveteen Rabbit.
Well,
It is
I love
her
the
favorite.
Velveteen
Well,
Rabbit.
let's go into it.
I think
Let's
the
talk about
Velveteen
it.
Rabbit is amazing. I think Cinderella is amazing. I love The Emperor's New Clothes. I mean, there's something beautiful about each one of these books. But those three books, I think you could spend just hours talking about. But the Velveteen Rabbit is so important because it's just such a well-done story. And I just think that it's so visceral for the child. I mean, a child understands love and how love genuinely changes something because of that relationship between the rabbit and the child. And the rabbit, lives with the child during his scarlet fever, and he hides so he won't be taken away. even though it's uncomfortable, even though it feels like he's burning next to this sick child, because he knows the child needs him. I mean, there is a genuine sacrifice there. And all of the characters are so, if you really think about how it's done, the mechanical toys,
they all
are
make
so
fun of
pompous.
them.
Yes. And they, have this modern ideas about things. And the wise skin horse, always recognizes that, those mechanical toys always break. They always come in. They're so arrogant. But, they are transient, right? They don't live because, they don't have something real in them. And I think if you pay attention to the details, like the skin horse, like that's an interesting name for that particular animal, a skin horse. And I think that that's maybe by the author intentional, like this is the thing that is human, right? This is the wise animal in the story. And this is the one that is pointing to what is actually real. And so the fact that it's not just a horse, but a skin horse, I think those are sort of interesting things that you can talk about with this story. What do you think?
I think it's about transformation.
Right.
And really, this is much deeper than you could go with a second grader, but you can certainly introduce it. How our own lives are transformed by Jesus. And to me, that is just an allegory of that transformation.
The skin horse is so wise. I mean, on page 5, the quote from the skin horse, the boy. Here, I'll read it to you.
Okay, read to us, Leigh.
I know. Well, these are the things that you can see about being loved. It reminds me of Charlotte a little bit in Charlotte's Web. I mean, Charlotte gives hard truths to Wilbur, right? So a friend isn't someone who just sugarcoats everything and just is only there for the good times. The friend, genuinely sits with you in your suffering, right? And is truthful about it too. And so
which you can do. So when we read Charlotte's Web next year, you can point back to the Velveteen Rabbit.
That's exactly right.
Yes. And then that student starts making that connection.
Right. And so, the rabbit says, "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day when they were lying side by side in the nursery. "Does it mean having things buzz inside you and a stick-out handle?" And the skin horse says, "Real isn't how you are made. It's a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a really long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real." And the rabbit says, "Does it hurt?" And the skin horse says, "Sometimes." For the skin horse was always truthful. When you are real, you don't mind being hurt. I mean, the point of we're growing, we're transforming in our suffering. Like we have to acknowledge that it's going to hurt sometimes, but we're going to have friends right beside us, giving us truth and sitting with us in those hard times. And so the skin horse did that for the rabbit, and then the rabbit did that for the boy. And so, these are the things that, you don't want to go so deeply that the child doesn't just enjoy and recognize viscerally what the story is about, but you can point these things out and
should point them out, because if not, it's a sad,
it is a sad story, and I wanted to bring that up.
Yes, there's sadness in this story. There's sadness in a couple of these other books where where death is dealt with, and so it is time to start talking about it so that it's not scary. It's important to talk about it, and that life is not going to be smooth. And all through literature, we're going to see bad. This reminds me somehow of The Door in the Wall. In a couple of these books reminded me of The Door in the Wall, where you have to find your door, you find your purpose. Everybody's got one, and I think that's a big theme throughout literature that we're going to just keep hitting over and over. And I think this is the perfect example book of it. But I do know it's Leigh's. Of course, we started with it. I would have started with book number 1
you
for
left
the
window
year.
open. You could have.
That's exactly right.
I am so routine and organized. I would have started with Johnny Appleseed, because that's the first book we read in week 1, and we leapt somehow all the way over to the Velveteen Rabbit.
Well, and what I love about what you're saying is I have experienced that myself. I've experienced the reading of a book, or the kind of. When I was reading Narnia for the first time, I got to the last battle. And in the last battle, there's a chapter called Further Up, Further In. And it's as they're going up into heaven, essentially, that everything is becoming more real as they go further up and further in. And that was an idea that I certainly didn't understand when I first read it, but it's never left. It's an idea that's never left. And as I grow and as I get older, I kind of understand it more every time I read something similar to that. And I think that's what we're doing with a book like The Velveteen Rabbit is even if a child is conceptually struggling with what does it mean to be real,
that scene can live in your heart.
That scene will live there.
That's right.
And as they experience the love of their family, as they experience the love of maybe a spouse down the road and are transformed into something more than just themselves through that love, I think they'll kind of understand what's going on.
I have one more thing to say.
Please.
About the Velveteen Rabbit. Well, I love fairy tales. I love fairy stories. And an important thing about this that I think connects well with Cinderella is the fairy who comes to transform the rabbit. And it's really interesting if you pay attention, the fairy arrives when the rabbit cries. It's the tears that bring forth the fairy, right? So the fairy arrives just in that moment of need. And so I think that's a really important thing to bring out. It's that this even in the lowest moment for this rabbit, that's when the good appears. That's when the hope arrives.
When you feel like
that's right.
Everything is hopeless.
That's right. So it was his very tears that grew the fairy up, and I think that's an important thing to bring out, and point out to the students.